I'm going to be talking about the physiology of music. We need to start in the beginning, right? So, when I consider music and all that it is, I see the fingerprint of God because it has this intelligent design with order and organization. It's full of beauty and mystery, and it has inexhaustible possibilities. Its origins are of heaven, and yet music seems to have been hardwired into mankind at creation. We know it originated in heaven because we have the Genesis account, but it doesn't say on such and such day God created music, right? However, it does say in Job 38:7 that at the foundations of the earth, the morning stars, they shouted for joy, and they sang together. So as the Lord was creating in all of his glory, and mankind and all of the earth, all of heaven was rejoicing. They were singing. So as I became a music therapy student and I learned that music lights up, they kept saying, music lights up the entire brain. I pictured this moment that God himself is breathing the breath of life into mankind. And as man is awakening to this glorious music, not only is he receiving this vital source of life through the breath of God, but his whole mind is becoming activated and alive, if you will, by the sound of this glorious music of heaven. That's just as nourishing to the mind and the body as those leaves of the tree of life. And so music certainly connects us to heaven, but I know music was given as a gift to mankind here on earth for a very specific purpose, and one I'm excited to share with you today. So the lecture objectives are these. The first thing is that I want you to see music as medicine, or better yet, a natural remedy. I want you to think of it as more than just entertainment, cultural enrichment, even how we casually engage with it in our musicianship, singing in a choir, and even going beyond the use of music in worship. I want you to be able to see by the end of this lecture that music is really a part of our health message. And that if we understand it through the basis of health, then this would really help inform how we engage with it in all other areas, including our musicianship, including the worship service. Whatever your mission field is, whether it's at the sanitarium or the hospital. The second is that by the end of this lecture, I really want you to understand how music is processed in the brain and then therefore impacts the rest of our physiology. And lastly, how it can be incorporated into your life, into your lifestyle center, into your practice, wherever, again, your mission field is. All right, so to begin with understanding how music is processed, I like to start with this comparison or analogy, if you will, of the digestive system with the auditory system. They're very similar, and I think it helps illustrate this better. So just like we take food into our mouths and it enters the stomach, the same thing happens. We take a physical sound wave, which is a vibration, into the anatomy of the ear and into the brain. Then the next step is the mechanical processing. So the mouth chews the food, the stomach churns the food into smaller pieces. The similar thing is happening with the auditory perception. So that middle ear is amplifying and transmitting vibrations, both with the goal of making further processing possible. The next step would be the chemical and sensory transformation. So in the stomach, You have the enzymes and everything breaking down with the acid in the stomach, and you have those three molecules, right? Your carbohydrates, your proteins, and your fats, and they're being turned into nutrients, right? Well, similarly, you have that physical element of the sound wave, which is your frequency, amplitude, and power spectrum. It's being transformed into a neural signal that then can be understood in the brain as pitch, loudness, timbre, and duration. Then finally, you have the absorption or the interpretation. So the intestines are absorbing those nutrients into the bloodstream so that they can be used wherever they're needed throughout the body, right? The blood goes and bathes the organs and everywhere, and it provides that nutrients that it needs. Well, very similarly, when the brain and the auditory cortex receives those musical signals, it's then translating that sound into something meaningful, okay? So those neural signals then are going all over the brain, and then from there, you can impact the entire nervous system. So just as different foods affect the body differently, different elements of music also can have physiological impacts on the body in different ways. So I mentioned, music lights up the whole brain. And this is a really important component to why music is so powerful when it comes to health. So around the 1990s, up until about that point, researchers more or less believed that music was like a right brain activity. So then in the 1990s, there was this neuroimaging fMRI scan, kind of a boom of neuroimaging, right? Where now they were able to see in real time what was happening in the brain as it was engaging in music. And this is what they saw. So they saw a brain at rest, and then when engaging in music, it's as if everything lights up. It's incredible. And so it was no longer this idea that music is processed, in a specific area or hemisphere of the brain, that it's like this global activation happening, that it's this full experience where music actively involves nearly every region of the brain and nearly every neural subsystem. It involves perception, not just of sound, action, and movement, even when we listen passively. So if I were to be singing a song that, was maybe upbeat, even if you're not tapping your foot or you're not moving to the music, your motor regions of your brain are still being activated as it's processing the rhythm of that music. And so it's also, regions of the brain are also associated with emotion, cognition, timing, and prediction. And then you also have that bridge. The corpus callosum is that bridge that kind of combines the two sides of the hemisphere of the brain. It acts kind of like a conductor, and it's connecting both sides of the brain, and it's strengthening those networks. Those whole systems are being strengthened through music engagement. It's releasing those feel-good hormones, the dopamine, the oxytocin as you're engaging in music. And so really it's this comprehensive cognitive workout that improves learning, memory, mood, and many other consequential health benefits. So who's heard here that listening to music or engaging in music is like a brain workout? Have you heard that? Okay. Well, this is why they're saying that, because literally it's engaging so much. I mean, you're not just lifting a weight with this arm. You're like doing something full body exercise, okay? It's moving all the muscles. And this, just a quick note here, in musicians, there's different anatomy, like basically like the corpus callosum is larger in musicians. So it does prove to have different anatomical changes in the brain as well, for the better. So let's see. Next slide here. So here is all the different regions of the brain involved, kind of an overview, really. that are involved in processing music. So again, it's not just a single element, but we have like the temporal lobe, which is where your auditory cortex is, and that's interpreting the pitch, the tone, the memory, harmony, and language. The frontal lobe is your motor and your executive function, as we're all pretty well aware. But this is also processing the rhythm, the decision-making. Like if I'm singing a song and I say, oh, I want to hit this note next, it's making that decision, right? Motor planning for your singing and your playing. So more of your fine motor movements, like moving your fingers, playing an instrument, even like my diaphragm and as I'm singing and the larynx, the muscles in the larynx, that's all in the frontal lobe. Prefrontal cortex involves prediction, anticipation, musical structure, and meaning. And then you have more of the timing and rhythmic elements being processed in the cerebellum and basal ganglia. Your limbic system, of course, and your amygdala is where the emotional processing is happening, the memory, the pleasure of the experience. And then the nucleus accumbens that's where your reward system is. That's where the motivation lives. When you're hearing music and you're like, oh, I want to get up and I want to walk outside, or I want to go for a run, or I'm, more motivated to go clean my house, whatever it might be. And then even your occipital lobe is involved through the visual cortex in reading music, and even when you're watching performers, you're matching the way they're speaking, and you're paying attention to the sound of the music, and it's just developing that perception. I have a choir director that would always tell us this story about how he has a friend in finance that would always call him anytime he had a job opening, and he would say, do you have any recent music graduates? And the reason was because he found that they were just better employees in the sense that they handled problem solving differently. Because a musician's brain is, because of that multi-connectivity aspect of all these different things being engaged and exercised, he said, I find that when they get to a problem, they don't just stop. They have different ways of looking at something and going around that problem and working it out. And so, it's like it just trains your brain to think about things differently in a better way. All right, and so I talked a little bit about the different aspects of music, but these are the 9 elements of music that, and really I chose these 9, there's around 8 or 9, it kind of depends on how you categorize them. But these are 9 elements of music: rhythm, melody, harmony, dynamics, tempo, timbre, which is like the unique quality or sound, like a voice is different than a saxophone, for example, right? That's timbre. Texture is like how many layers of things are happening in the music. A symphony has, or an orchestra has all those different instrumental sounds, maybe different counterpoint melodies happening, some different rhythmic aspects, compared to like voice and piano. Right? That texture is going to be drastically different. And then form and pitch. So what music therapists, and I'll get into what exactly a music therapist is, what we do is we intentionally take these elements of music and we're trying to manipulate them in an intentional way to obtain certain goals that are not musical. So for example, and this is a very simplified example, if I wanted to increase energy, let's say that was my goal. I'm working with maybe an older population, and they need to be more cognitively stimulated, and we need to get more energy in the room. So if I were to sing, you are my sunshine, my only sunshine, you make me happy when skies are gray. That's nice, but that's not going to meet my goal, because what I'm going to do is take something simple like the tempo, and I'm going to manipulate that to reach my goal. So I'm going to say, you are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. Just a very simple example, right? So I'm taking that element of music, and I'm changing that to meet my goal. All right? So So what's happening is that those 9 elements of music, that music processing in the brain overlaps with these goal areas where other processing is happening. Specifically, your motor control, your language, your cognition, and your perception. And because of that, I can use music to reach a goal in that area. So let's say my goal area is speech, and I'm trying to retrain someone how to speak again. I'm going to use singing in the aspects of language that are like musical. So there's pitch involved, there's dynamics involved in speaking, and I'm going to assess those things. I'm going to see how I can use those elements to then retrain the brain or the person, right, to how to speak again. And we're going to see some really cool examples of this later. So what is music therapy? Because I'm talking about it here and there. And when I talk to people, I find not a lot of people actually know what music therapy really is. We often think of it as like music ministry. And on the surface, it looks like we're just doing music, right? But that's not what's actually happening. So this is kind of my personalized definition of it. So it's an allied health profession, meaning that we typically work with some other people as well as a team. That uses the understanding of how music is processed in the brain to achieve evidence-based non-musical goals that include cognitive, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual goals. So again, due to that global activation of the brain through music, the fact that the brain impacts every function of the body, it's a very effective tool to both promote physical and mental health, aid in rehabilitation, learning and memory, and enhance psychosocial outcomes. So even things like behavioral goals. We work a lot with like kiddos, maybe with a learning disability or something like that, and there might be certain behavioral goals like learning to wait their turn or something of that nature. And so we work with them a little bit on behavior with the music. On learning those new behaviors. And so, therefore, music is for all people, of all abilities, in all ages. Because a lot of times people think, I must be contraindicated because I can't sing, I can't carry a tune, I'm not musical. It's not about your musical skill. It is about the way that God created your brain to process music. That's what it's about. So you do not have to be a musician. Like I said, there's some different anatomy benefits in the brain if you're a musician. But ultimately, how we use music to, let's say, rehabilitate a skill, it can be used with anybody. Let's see, next, okay. So music therapists, they wear many hats. Like I said, first and foremost, there's the musicianship aspect of it. So right now in my studies, I'm learning how to be proficient on many instruments. We usually, of course, voice, but also piano and guitar. And even if there's a time where we might need to teach an instrument as an intervention, so it's just helpful to be proficient on many different instruments and be as diverse in that area as possible. It's an allied health profession. We minor in psychology because there's a very strong psychological component. We have to be we're constantly assessing our patients and what might be coming up with a person as we're working in an intervention, whether emotionally or just understanding that there might be something happening, that they're having kind of an adverse reaction to. But typically, emotionally, if there's something we need to stop and address, then we're equipped to do that. And the reason I put this slide in here is because I wanted to demonstrate how there's this really strong marriage between the medical missionary work and the role of a music therapist. Now, I know as a music therapist, I'll be a medical missionary, but really more of the point that I'm trying to make here is how much music really does belong in the tool belt of every medical missionary. And when I use the term medical missionary, I'm not just saying that, like, if you work at Wildwood or a health institute, I'm saying in your practice as a doctor or wherever you are. It's a really powerful tool because at the end of the day, it could be probably one of the most readily available natural remedies that we have. I mean, if you think about the times we're living in, like Paul and Silas, they were in the prison. And they didn't have access to charcoal or plants, right? But they sang. And, we don't know who we can minister to in a moment. And if we had more of an intelligent understanding of how music can be used to benefit health, not just of our own health, but others, then I think this would be a very powerful tool in every tool belt and wherever we go. Not to mention, if you think of the evangelistic aspect, right? The health message is already the entering wedge. But imagine if you couple that with music. It's very powerful to reach communities and people of all different backgrounds. So I already kind of talked about the goals that we set, but also generally there's about 4 categories of interventions that we use. Or that can be used, so we use thousands of different musical interventions, but overall they fall into these categories. So just receptive, just listening to music. Maybe I'm singing it, maybe we're listening to something recorded. Recreation, which is, just taking a song like How Great Thou Art, and I'm going to sing it, okay? So that's considered recreation. Improvisational, which is just creating something right there on the spot. And composition is obviously songwriting. Composition is a great tool to be used to process through lots of emotions. When you have just received news of a diagnosis, or maybe you're processing your mortality, having some of these tools like songwriting, it really provides a really powerful outlet to process your experience and your emotions and kind of help somebody work through that. You don't have to be a musician. That's what I would be there for as the music therapist. But we would use that as a tool. All right, so let's get into why this is so potent. So I already talked about the total brain engagement of music. The other factor is the neuroplasticity principles that we're really relying on, and the 3 main ones are the increase in dopamine, the neurosynchrony, and a clear signal. So, for neuroplasticity to take place in the brain, you need dopamine. Music is extremely dopaminergic. We know this because you hear all the time about how it's very rewarding and it activates those reward centers and all of that. So also music also meets the other criteria of being a clear signal and then the neurosynchrony and how it's engaging multiple networks at once. So just touching on the dopamine aspect, one of the things that is kind of like our practice or best practice is we use what's called patient-preferred music. And yes, it's catering to the preferences of someone's musical taste. However, just like when you work with somebody on diet, for example, people have tastes. But it's our job to educate them on the health benefits and to gradually move them from where they're at. We call it the ISO principle in our practice. You take where they're at, and then you slowly, through education and through different, interventions, we're moving you from one place where you're currently to where you're desired to be. And during this time, we can educate the tastes and what's beneficial. But the reason for that preferred thing, of course, is because it's going to be the most beneficial in producing the dopamine. And we all have preferences. We have to respect the fact that everybody has their own will. We don't force the will. We have boundaries. But, I might like broccoli more than I like carrots. It's okay if I eat broccoli instead of carrots. The same way that if I don't really prefer Amazing Grace, I would rather hear, How Great Thou Art, then that's okay. So I'm just using the music or the songs that you like the best. But recently there was another study that I thought was pretty interesting that talked about pleasurable music being just as beneficial as preferred music. And what that means is if it's done well, it's enjoyable, it's just as beneficial, It just goes into the musicianship aspect of it, right? So I don't know why I'm picking on Amazing Grace, but if I didn't enjoy Amazing, this maybe is not my favorite hymn. But if I hear somebody beautifully singing it, and maybe they have just the nicest arrangement with, a few instruments behind them, I can just benefit from the beauty of that music, and it's also producing that dopamine that's needed. All right. So also, it's a reinforcing stimulus. This is another reason why music is so effective. So again, there's that behavioral aspect of it. We use cognitive behavioral therapy to change behaviors, and music is that rewarding stimulus. And then naturally, we have that sympathy between the brain and the body, right? So when you're impacting the brain, then you're going to impact the body. So lastly, music is its own language. We always hear that it's a universal language, right? So this is really important. Maybe there's times where you don't want to speak. Maybe right now is just not a good time. Well, I can go in as a music therapist. We can just do some music, and we can still have a conversation. Even more so, we work with clients that are nonverbal. And it's that point of connection, because I don't have an instrument in front of me, but if I were to go, and then you did something back, right? We're having a conversation, and what it's teaching that kiddo, maybe that's nonverbal, is they say something, then I say something, right? That there's this give and take to this communication thing, and then that connection is made in a child where that has not been developed. Does that make sense? So music is that tool for us to get there where language falls short. There was a really cool study that showed in nonverbal autistic children in this particular study that it's not that their auditory system didn't work. They were processing, they could hear just fine, is what I'm saying, but that when their parents spoke to them, that language center just didn't light up. But when they heard their parents singing, their language centers lit up. Fascinating, right? Because music has a way of just bypassing some of those areas in the brain that are either damaged or not working to full capacity. All right. So I just wanted to touch before I get more into the specifics on some